Good evening, everyone. Welcome to TIFF Bell Lightbox. My name is Keith Benny. I'm the Senior Manager of Adult Learning here at TIFF. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's special screening of Call Me By Your Name with the film's Academy Award-winning screenwriter and producer, James Ivory. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that tonight's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to come together on this land. On behalf of TIFF, we'd also like to thank our major sponsors, Bell, RBC, L'Oreal Paris, and Visa, as well as our major public supporters, the Government of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto. We'd also like to thank our donors and members for supporting TIFF's charitable mission, which is to transform the way people see the world through film. So you have an idea of the format of this evening's event. We split the conversation into two sections. James will join us for an extended introduction. We'll screen the film, and then we'll join you afterwards for a short Q&A. When author Andre Aciman was here in January, we spoke about the repeat watchability of Call Me By Your Name, that there's a unique joy in returning to this film, that it takes us back to our own first memories of love, full of discovery, but also maybe full of pain. We're excited for yet another opportunity to screen it for you again tonight. A return to bike rides in Italy, a return to those carefree days by the pool, and a return, of course, to Elio and to Oliver. The man who brought this world to the screen with such exactness, who carried these wonderfully rich characters into the cinema, is James Ivory, who joins us tonight. Together with his partner Ismail Merchant and screenwriter Ruth Power Jabvala, James Ivory is responsible for some of the most memorable literary adaptations in cinema. The tour de force collaboration of Merchant Ivory Productions brought us the picturesque classics Shakespeare Walla, Bombay Talkie, The Europeans, The Quartet, The Bostonians, A Room with a View, Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, Howard's End, and Remains of the Day. Also, of course, Morris, which we were honored to screen last night as part of our Books on Film series. It's such a wonderful complement to tonight's film. Call Me By Your Name was instantly hailed for its raw and deeply interior portrait of desire and first love. Such an achievement was only possible with James's vast experience bringing literary worlds to life. This included the monumental task of translating Elio's first-person narrative into action, into scene, into dialogue. It's no surprise then that he's been collecting accolades all year for his adapted screenplay, a Critics' Choice Award, a Writers Guild of America Award, a BAFTA Award, a USC Scripter Award, and of course, an Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. James's last visit to TIFF was in 2012 when we showed Howard's End in 70mm. On the occasion of his visit, we programmed a series entitled James Ivory Elegant Pairings, screenings of his own work together with complementary films from the likes of Satyajit Ray, Louis Buñuel, and Alfred Hitchcock. Many years ago now, in the lead up to that event, I had emailed him to request a headshot and bio to include on our website. 1 week later, I received the most warm and wonderful letter. James had taken the time to handwrite his biography and send along a hard copy photo for our use. This thoughtfulness and meticulous attention to detail when completing a task shows through in each and every scene of Call Me By Your Name. We're so honored to have him here once again, this time to share in his newest triumph. Please join me in welcoming James Ivory. Thank you for joining us here in Toronto.
You're welcome.
Such an honor for us all to be here with you and revisit the film. I'm wondering, before we begin, by a show of hands, who is coming to the film again for maybe a second, a third, or a fourth time? Many of us, of course, have been taken by this wonderful film, and it's a testament to many things, I think. The intimacy of Andre Aciman's novel, Luca Guadagnino's direction, the performances from Timothy Chalamet, Armie Hammer, and Michael Stuhlbarg and Amir Cesar. But the bridge to all these wonderful things, the connector is your beautifully crafted screenplay. And so it's really an honor to have you here to speak about the film.
I'm happy to say more.
And so to begin, at Merchant Ivory, you and your collaborators, Ismail Merchant and Ruth Prawarjabvala, became experts of literary adaptation. You've carried on that tradition with Call Me By Your Name. And so I'm wondering what you would say are the qualities of a good literary adaptation. How does a screenwriter get it right?
Well, one lesson I learned from Ruth Jabvala, and which I sort of carried out here, except there wasn't so much dialogue. She said, you know, you may be reading, we may be adapting a novel by a very great novel by a very great writer, and you may have 10, in one scene, you may have 10 superb lines, all of which you just are crazy about. And she said, really, you should throw away 7 of them and keep 3. And that was the big lesson, I suppose, that I applied, or would apply, is not to load the screenplay down with a lot of dialogue. I think you have to find other ways to tell your story. I mean, some dialogue. I mean, I love dialogue. In fact, I like it so much, and sometimes she and I would fight in the editing room over. I would want to put more in, and she would like to take even her own out. So, but that's was one of them.
And how do you know which lines to throw away? Is it trial and error? And
I don't know. Sometimes I would cheat a bit, and it has to have strength and storytelling strength. It has to have. It can't just be there as a sort of a pretty thing. However, sometimes the pretty thing is exactly what you want to hear. So we keep what we like.
And when we hear about adaptation, we often hear the word faithful used quite often. Do you think it's the role of a screenwriter to be faithful to the source text, or more to reinterpret or reimagine?
I think it's to be faithful to the tone and meaning of the original. I think you have to be. Otherwise, why do it? If you're not going to honor and be inspired by the original work, why even get involved in it? So that's very important. But I think you can do all sorts of things. I mean, you have to sometimes. You have to make. You have to drop tons of things often to do an effective screenplay, and sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to beef up a minor character. You think it's kind of minor character, but that character is very important in the story. But you don't. The author has not told you very much about that character, and that's one of the things that you have to do.
And so, with that kind of framework in mind, how did you first approach Call Me By Your Name? And do you remember your first impressions after reading the novel and how it might be adapted to the screen?
Well, as soon as I knew that I was going to, I offered to write the screenplay because at one point I was going to co-direct it with Luca. And so I said I wanted to have my own screenplay. There had been a screenplay earlier that had been written, but I didn't think it was, I didn't want to use that screenplay, or I wanted my own. And I think the first thing that I did, and I told Luca what I wanted, that I said I don't want to have the ending of the book, that I want to end the story at the sort of height of emotion and feeling in the story. I don't want to move on to 25 years and come back to these characters who are then sort of raking over the ashes of their first love. I thought that was kind of a downer. And so he agreed, and that's what we did. And then there was an entire chapter of the book that we dropped. It's when the two boys go to Rome on a little trip that they have together. But it was such a lengthy and so many things going on, and new characters and all sorts of new situations. I thought at the end of a film you can't really have such an enormous episode as that, and you never get away with it, and it would make the film so long, and so I just utterly dropped that chapter, and the two boys go on a shorter trip and go to the mountains and that sort of thing.
Are those cuts usually made? Is it a combination of being in service to the story, but also what the budget's able to call for? Because I know you mentioned it was originally, you had set the screenplay in Sicily originally.
Well, Luca didn't want to shoot when he decided that he was going to do it. He didn't want to shoot the film in Liguria, on the Italian coast, because he said there would be so many tourists there and so many summer people, it would just be impossible to work and be very, very, very expensive to do that. And so then we thought that I thought, well, let's do it in southern Italy. I wanted to go to a place that had Greek ruins, Greek temples. So there were two places where that happens. One is Sicily, or the extreme south of Italy, and another is another area also south called Puglia. And so we visited those places, and it was more or less planned that we would do that, go there. But then there was so little money to make the film, and the idea of transporting a whole crew and all the plane tickets and all the per diems that had to be paid, so that was abandoned, and he decided to make it around where he lives, which is near somewhat south of Milan, and the actual town where he lives is Crema, and do it there, which had an effect on where they find the statue. You don't they had to go and shoot that at Lago di Garda, and you don't normally find Hellenistic bronzes in the Lago di Garda. And in fact, the Italian papers wrote about that and said, "What is that statue doing, being dragged up out of the Lago di Garda?" But I couldn't. I'm just glad they did it at all. So.
And that scene itself, that kind of storyline is of your own invention. That was something you added.
Yeah. Well, I had to give the father something to do besides smoking a cigarette and turning over some papers. So he had to have some sort of profession, I thought. So I made him into a classics scholar and an archaeologist and art historian type.
How do you, as a screenwriter, know what the novel's lacking or needs to be a complete film to be on screen in that kind of instance?
Well, and you sort of feel it sometimes that something is lacking, or the other thing is you want to add things, and you know, as you work, you think, well, this could be interesting if I had this, that, or the other, and I don't know, you just do it for the fun of it, really, as you want to.
And so the Elio's first-person narrative is, there are pages and pages in the novel where he interprets Oliver's glances and confronts his feelings, and it's recognized so beautifully in Timothy's performance. How did you approach the task of translating such an internal narrative to the screen?
Well, I had to find little things that would somehow suggest his turmoil and what he was thinking, and just little actions all along the way, and they're hard to single out and say, but but that's what I had to do.
And in one of the versions of the screenplay I read, there was a narrator figure that we don't see in the film. Did voiceover or narration something you considered?
Right away we said we didn't want much voiceover or any, and and I've always been sort of suspicious of voiceover for my own movies, with the exception of Heat and Dust, where we have quite a lot of it. But I hope not to have much voiceover. And there was a little bit in the script. There were moments when I thought it might have been useful and nice. If you can have two songs, I don't know why you can't have a little bit of voiceover. So. And the songs are kind of voiceover themselves. But we just decided not to do it, and then there wasn't any. I wasn't around for the editing, so they may have shot it and recorded it, but it didn't turn up in the film.
Timothy's performance is so powerful. What do you feel like he brought to this role?
Well, he brought himself, basically. I mean, he's such a character, and skinny and terribly smart, and terribly charming, and all those are just great, and musically skilled. I mean, he was when he played the piano. I mean, he had learned the piano long ago, or at least could play that bit. So yeah, he's an actor of great individuality, which you're always searching for. You want that throughout your directing life, to find actors of who are really originals. You hope.
Right. Is there a particular scene that was really challenging to adapt? One that you took many tries before you felt it was just right?
Kind of, yeah. The scene where in at the monument, when Elio makes his affection or his feelings towards Oliver plain, and I wondered how in the world can one shoot this, because it ought to have many cuts, many different shots. To make it work out, and they keep wandering around the place, and I wondered how that would be done, and what if you had a day that starts out sunny and ends up cloudy, and you haven't finished the scene, then what do you do? And then luckily, and so I thought about it a lot. I wrote it and hoped that they would break it up into lots of shots, but they didn't. They shot the entire scene in one shot, one take, which was great. I mean, a wonderful way to do it. And I think it happened on almost the only sunny day they had.
Wow.
It was the most rainy May and June that they'd had in Italy in 500 years or something. And they just could not ever get the sun. And the film doesn't look like that. And we had the same problem with The Room with the View.
Really?
When we were in Italy. We had very few sunny days.
I read that what also initially grabbed you into the novel was the setting in Italy. What do you love so much about Italy?
Well, that's always hard to answer. And I just love Italy. I always have, and I like going there. I have many Italian friends. When I went there when I was 22 for the first time. I arrived in Venice and fell in love, and it's never gone away. I can't tell you why. I mean, some people say, "Oh, well, why did you spend so many years in India? What is it about India that so interested you?" I can't say, or I could say. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but
right.
I mean, we all know about Italy. Come on.
There are many wonderful things.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. You speak so fondly of your, obviously, of your Merchant Ivory partners. Were there moments when working on Call Me by Your Name that you leaned on experience and learning from your collaborations with Ismail and Ruth?
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, you may not be conscious of it, but especially with Ruth, not so much with Ismail, because Ismail, was a producer, but certainly in my working with Ruth, and yeah, there was.
And last night we screened Morris, which is also about same-sex love and desire, and people inevitably make a lot of comparisons with Call Me by Your Name, but I'm wondering how you view the two films and how they're linked for you.
Well, they're quite different, I think, and the story of Morris and Clive is under a kind of terrible cloud of dread, the whole thing. I mean, their love was completely forbidden by law. You could be put in prison for a long time for gross indecency, it was called, like Oscar Wilde was, which was only 15 years before. And so there is that kind of dread hanging over the whole story. And they just sort of grab their moments when they can, and they're different kinds of stories, and also Morris is very much another kind of dread over it. There's the whole specter of the English class system, or not specter. I mean, it's there like a lid on a pot, pressing down, and that's also part of Morris, which was not the case with Call Me By Your Name, there isn't any sort of class thing in Call Me By Your Name. They're just some well-off people living in Italy and Americans. And we don't have a class system, right?
When Andre was here, we spoke about the repeat kind of watchability of this film. That it's a film you can watch again and again and find new things, and it's not. You can't say that for every film that you necessarily want to return to it on multiple times. Why do you think it is that audiences return to this film again and again?
I just think its theme is of great interest to everybody, and it's the subject of countless poems and songs and down the ages. First love and between two beautiful young people in a beautiful place in the summertime. It's just, and it's full of emotion and also full of the question, well, is it going to work out or is it not? And it's always intriguing, and you hope it will, but you don't know that it will. And it doesn't quite in Call Me By Your Name. Almost does, but.
So it has all those elements together.
Yeah.
As the audience watches tonight, is there a scene or an exchange you'd like them to pay close attention to that we can consider afterwards?
Well, there's the whole thing about did the mother know? And well, in my script she did, but Andre Osman asked me to take that out, so I did. But watch the mother's face the morning after the boys make love, and then they come down for breakfast. Watch the mother's face and eyes, then decide for yourself whether she knew.
So you have some homework. Thank you for that wonderful setup. Enjoy the film, and we will see you here afterwards. Thank you. Just join me in welcoming back to the stage James Ivory. I want to ask about the ending first, since it's still very present in the room here. How you landed on this moment in front of the fireplace, full of grief, joy, the whole range of emotions that really brings us into what Elio's feeling at that moment. You had mentioned about cutting the final scenes of them revisiting this. How did you arrive at the fireplace as the place where he would revisit himself?
Well, I didn't arrive at the fireplace because I wasn't there when the scene was shot. But in the screenplay, it was something similar. The family was celebrating Christmas in the house, and this was after he'd had the telephone conversation with Oliver, and Oliver tells him he's going to get married. And then he's decorating the tree and lighting the candles on the tree. And you can well, in Italy, you can still get little candles, and it's not against the law like it is in America. So his face was inside the tree, and he was lighting these candles, and then he sort of tears up. And he keeps on lighting the candles and keeps on lighting them. And that's how it ended in my screenplay. But then the whole idea of Christmas was done away with. As I say, I wasn't there, right. And then Luca came up with the idea of him looking into the fire.
The connection to fire, I guess, is still there as a reflective.
Yeah.
So before the screening, you had mentioned to pay attention to that moment at the dinner table.
The breakfast table.
Yeah, the breakfast table. And so ambiguity in the mother's knowing or not. So I guess, should we ask
Sure.
what they thought?
What did you think? Huh? Yeah, she had an idea.
One question I had, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the conversation between Elio and his father. In addition to being a film about first love, it's also a film, I think, about how to be a good parent. How did you approach the scene between Elio and his father, and how did you approach that from the novel?
Well, there's a danger in such a scene at the very end of a film, a long, long dialogue scene, after you've sat there for 2 hours watching a movie, and that people won't accept a scene like that. The audience is just ready to go home. But I thought, nevertheless, we have to have that scene. It's such an important scene, and it's just so. It means so much, and it will mean a lot to people, and it meant a lot to me. But I did have to shorten it a bit. It's not quite as long on the screen as it is in the book, and in fact, Luca also shortened it slightly. But I didn't approach it in any particular way except to trim it down a bit, and. I imagined it as more or less as it is, was just the two of them sitting on a sofa.
Right.
And it's turned out that way.
And is that a moment maybe as a screenwriter where you let the strength of the source material shine through?
Yeah. Well, I didn't see there was much that I ought to be doing to it, or I didn't feel I needed or should be changing it.
Mm-hmm. On that question of how much the mother knows, something that has always interested me is at the end of that speech, Elio asks his father,
"Does she know?
Does she know?" And I've always wondered whether that question is, does she know about Oliver and I, or does she know about the father?
No, it meant Oliver and,
right.
About Oliver and me.
And so in that moment, do you think he's choosing to be kind then and say that she doesn't know?
I think he kind of, I think he spared the son any further sort of discussion or difficult kind of discussion. I mean, if he said yes, mother does know, then that might lead to other things that he would have to say, and so I think he was sparing the son. That's how I interpreted it.
Right. Do you have a favorite scene or moment that Luca and his actors interpreted that you think best captures the spirit of your screenplay, or something that surprised you?
Oh, several. I mean, yeah, there are quite a few that I particularly like. I like the scene where after Elio in the square with the statue reveals his feelings, and then they go off into the woods and have their first kiss. And I like that scene very much. I think that's a very good scene. I like the scene where the families all on a couch together, and there's music playing, and the mother reads in German about the prince who dared not speak his mind about his love, and then the lights go off. It's raining. I like that scene a lot.
They really capture the familiarity of the family.
Thought, yeah. And I meant it to do that. I kind of developed that scene a bit from what it was in the book. It's interesting because in the novel, it's the father that reads the book and not the mother.
I think it's fitting that she reads it. I asked you earlier what scene was difficult to translate to the screen, and I thought you might have said the peach scene, because I know that
I mean,
you've spoken.
You just have to leave them to do it. Then what else? So they have to show me. I mean, what are you going to do? So
right. But thinking of the dialogue too, it is there's not much of it. It's pretty sparse, but it's quite precise.
And a lot of, and I think that pretty much comes from the novel, as I remember. It's pretty much what it was in the novel.
And is that a scene as a screenwriter where you trust?
Well, here and there were things I added to it, about the business about the going from the animal kingdom, or no, going from, or you come to vegetable kingdom from, and you
next
onto
you go
animal
to minerals,
kingdom, and then Oliver says that's me, of course, and so that's sort of a new thing.
Right. There are a number of your films where characters wrestle with how they're feeling and how they choose to act when they're confronted with love. Many of them first love. Do you consider Call Me By Your Name as part of or similar to the films in the Merchant Ivory canon?
Sure. In some ways, it is a Merchant Ivory film.
Yeah, it has the big house.
It couldn't help but be.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And love and desire, are these enduring themes that
I think
present themselves?
Pretty much. Yeah. Well, you don't always have, a young. You don't always have a teenager who's
Right.
Seducing an older man. That was new for us.
Mm-hmm. That scene in the you mentioned about them going off into the countryside after they're riding their bike. It did strike me watching Morris last evening that the same scene, very similar, of them being off in the countryside and the kind of echoes between them.
Yeah, it's quite similar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll open into your questions in just a moment, so start thinking of them. I wanted to ask that your films have meant so much to so many people, particularly with Morris and with Call Me by Your Name, for gay audiences who can see themselves in these characters. And is it humbling for you to know that these films have revealed something unique about gay desire, something validating about that type of love?
Humbling?
Mm-hmm. That so many people, what I mean is that so many people have been, I've talked to people who've been kind of transformed after seeing a film like Call Me by Your Name or Morris, that they've...
Well, I'm pleased when people come up to me on the street and tell me that, and that about either film. I'm happy that it's helped them. And last night there was a guy from the audience who walked home with us and said how much that film meant to him, and it changed his life. And yeah, when you hear that, I mean, I suppose in a sense it's humbling. And I have heard that again and again and again. More with Morris than with this film.
Right. You've had such a vast career as a director, as a screenwriter, as a producer, and you have so much wisdom to pass on to younger filmmakers and screenwriters. In the early days setting out, are there things that you wish you'd known then that you know now?
Well, yeah, a lot of things. I mean, sure. One thing about making movies is that everyone is different, and no problems are ever the same, really. Every film has its own problems, and you've generally never had to deal with such problems before, and so you have to find a way of solving those problems. And as I say, they're different in every single film. So you build up a kind of an experience, but it's not, in some kinds of way, it's not something that you can generally use, because, as I say, every film has its own terrible things that have to be resolved or solved, and you have to find a way to do it.
We've talked through a few of them, but what would you say maybe is the biggest problem or thing that needed to be solved for Call Me by Your Name?
Well, to have some kind of a replacement for the what would have been voiceover in some perhaps, but a replacement for the mature thoughts of Elio, writing or speaking later on, after maybe a couple of decades, to find some way to give form to those, to show what he was doing and thinking when he was a teenager, and to find a consistent and good way to do that. And that wasn't all that easy.
Right. Well, I think you certainly...
And I'm sure that went on after I was no longer there. I mean, I'm sure that was something that Luca was also having to deal with, and Timmy. I mean, the two of them together were working things out that I had not managed to do.
Right.
Or new things had come up, but they needed to sort out.
And how much license as a screenwriter do you give to directors and to actors to interpret the works?
But you have to give them complete license. I mean, that's something I learned in doing this. I mean, you can't tell them how to. You can't tell a director how to direct a scene. I mean, you have to let him. That's humbling. so, so I just said, hope for the best. But I mean, I think I got the best, pretty much. I mean, there were little things here and there that I would have changed, but
Right.
no, I mean, nothing major.
No?
Not at all. There was an interesting, there was a character that was lost that was very important in the novel and in my screenplay, and that was the older sister that Oliver was maybe having an affair with, or he said later on that he wasn't, but, and her name was Kiara. And she was very glamorous and beautiful and smart and spoke perfect English, and apparently, and she was really keen, very, very keen on Oliver. And the actress that they hired to play that part, I wrote that up a lot, so that what was happening is that she and Elio were sort of natural rivals for Oliver, and they came out in different scenes. I mean, it was obviously there was a rivalry there, and she knew, and he knew, and so on. Well, the actress that they hired was her English wasn't good enough to do those scenes. She wasn't that fluent, and that was all lost. For instance, in my screenplay, after Oliver's been put on the train and he goes off and then he calls his mother to come get him, he doesn't call his mother because actually there was a scene there in which between the three of them, and Kiara was the third person at the station. And he calls Kiara, and he rides back with Kiara, or she takes him back in the car, and he breaks into tears. And it's Kiara, not his mother, who puts her hand out in a sort of new, kind of a matronly way, and touches his face where he's crying. And to me, to have lost that was a terrible thing. Right. But there was nothing we could do. And so the mother steps in and takes the role of Kiara, the elder sister. Those kinds of things happen on the film. They're just always going to happen. Yeah. There's nothing you can do about it. And you can't blame anybody. And you just feel sorry that that extra thing wasn't there. I think dramatically that would have been interesting.
Right. But you learn to let things go.
Well, you have to. Yeah. I mean, there's the film, and you have to let it go.
Want to open it up to your questions, so please put a hand up and we'll get a volunteer to you with a microphone. I'm going to see there's one down here, and then we'll go up there.
Hi, I just had kind of a quick question. Being from a multilingual family myself, I found the multilingualism in the movie very interesting, how kind of, especially the Perlmans speak English, French, Italian, even a bit of German amongst each other. I was wondering if you could talk about how you incorporated that into your screenplay, how you kind of decided when certain characters would be speaking certain languages to each other.
I didn't quite...
So the multilingual nature of the characters speaking.
I mean... we just had to do that. We had to accept that. It was a family that was half Italian and half American, with Italian servants and Italian friends around, and wherever people should be speaking Italian, I just had them. We've always done that in our movies. We've never not done it. If they have to speak a foreign language, they do, and we put subtitles, and that's what happened here. I mean, it's a very straightforward thing. I mean, it wasn't a matter of a decision, but what happened is that some French actresses were playing parts which had been written for Italians, and so now it all came in French, and but that's just the way it was. French with subtitles, but there was no special thing about it.
Over here.
Hi. Yeah, I've got actually two quick questions. We're in Italy, but there's no Catholic guilt. The family's part Jewish, but there's no Jewish guilt. Do you feel that made the film, the story anyway, that much less believable?
In the novel, there was some Jewish guilt. Elio didn't like sleeping with Oliver in the bedroom that his grandfather used to have. That to him there was something wrong about that, and he not tormented, but it bothered him. I think there's some Jewish guilt there, and he was thinking, well, what? And it all comes out in the novel. What would the what would the grandfather say about this terrible thing that the two were doing in his bedroom. There was that, but I don't know if that amounts to Jewish guilt. But that is what he felt. But I didn't make anything of that.
Then in the relationship between Elio and Oliver, there was to me it seemed to be a weakness in the story, insofar that Oliver is treating Elio very coldly. He's very dismissive. He's distant. There's a line in there that explains that he decided to be so because he felt that Elio had expressed no interest in him. But I was looking for some greater reason for Elio to fall in love with this guy. Do you feel that there was enough there, enough substance, enough reason for that love?
It was Armie Hammer. So
I think that's the answer to your question. Yes, in the front row here.
I just had a question from like the writers, from your like writer's position during production. Is there like how much were you involved in, like with Luke? You say he changed some things and kind of you weren't a part of that, or was there times where you were on set where you got to participate in the filming? And like as a writer, when you kind of know to step back and kind of let.
Well, I wasn't on the set. I stayed in New York. I wasn't there for the shoot, and but I was kept informed of what was going on, and particularly when it came to the whole episode of finding the statue, and the statue should not have been found in the Lago di Garda. It should have been found in the Mediterranean, and that bothered me. And a whole new kind of dialogue had to be written to explain why such a statue was being pulled up out of a lake and not out of the ocean. And I was very worried about that and was sending notes and so forth. But just generally, I just was where I was off in New York, and they were there in Italy doing it. But there was very little, I had to hope for the best.
Is there someone with a microphone up there? I think it's being passed.
First of all, it was a very sensual film. I'm dying for a cigarette, and I don't even smoke. But I have a question about the sex scenes. The sex scenes between Elio and Marcia we see. The sex scene, the big scene, between Oliver and Elio, the camera pans to a window in a tree outside.
Don't tell me.
So we've just hit that point where... do you have any idea why that decision was made?
The scene could have gone on a little longer, as it was written, but not much longer, because you really can't show those kinds of things, and really, and they don't allow you to really get up close and love-making scenes of any kind. So that's just what Luca decided to do, and he felt that, and he had made explanations to in interviews and so forth as why he did that. And I think that's where we would have had an argument on the set. I think. I would have not wanted him to pan out the window towards some trees.
So you would have had a different approach.
I had an approach. It was in the script.
Next question down here.
Hi there. Thank you for coming, and congrats on your Oscar.
Thank you.
So it's interesting to hear that you were going to co-direct with Luca, and I know that when you write the script, you have the vision in your head. When the director has it, he has his vision in the head. When an editor has the footage, they have a vision in their head. I want to know what you would have done different visually if you had to direct this, whether it has to be how Luca really uses a 35 millimeter lens for a majority of the film, or difference in acting with Army or with Michael or with Timothy?
Well, that covers a lot of territory. I mean,
Yeah.
there,
It's
you
not
know,
very broad.
So yeah, I didn't feel that when I was watching the film that there were that he had done something that I didn't like, or that I would have shot it in a different way. I was pretty satisfied with it. There were very few moments when I wished that he'd done some other sort of thing. I mean, and I can't tell you how I would have done it because I wasn't there. But you know, I would, if I'd been there co-directing it, I'm sure that I would have come up with other ideas, and it would have been, some of those we would have done, and some we wouldn't have, and some we might have argued about, and therefore have lost time and confused the actors. So it was a good thing that I wasn't there. But I'm sure that, yeah, there were certain scenes which, and I knew when on seeing the film, when I remembered what I had written, and certain scenes got cut off at a point, I would have carried them further, or in some cases I would have got to some other soon faster, or you know, all along I knew what I had written, and I saw what had been done, and I would have made, but those things were minor and few. They weren't important things, really, on the whole.
There's another question in the back there.
Hello. I have a question on a detail in the film, and it's the section where, and I don't know if it's something that you wrote in the screenplay, or if it's in the novel, or if it's something that the director had chosen to put in, and it's the small section where Elio's coming down the stairs, and on the sofa, there's the cosmic fragments, and there's a voiceover of Army reading a snippet, and then there's a very intentional shot of the book on the sofa, and I was wondering what it meant.
Yeah, I kind of remember that, but not all that clearly. I'd have to see it to tell you if it meant anything to me. It might not. I mean, it might just have been a casual kind of little thing that happened, or something that Timmy decided to do suddenly. I really don't have an answer, I'm afraid.
Microphone is here, second row.
Hi. So I have two questions. The first one is, do you remember in the process of making the movie, is there any particular scene you have to fight over with Luca and you succeeded in the end? And the second question is, I remember Luca talking about the movie being 4 hours long, and do you have any idea that when we are going to see the 4 hour long version of Call Me By Your Name?
Well, it's like most of my movies, which are 4 hours long also when they're finished. And they're almost, the things you cut out are almost never seen. They're just not ever known about. And I'm sure that film is, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there for the shooting, so I don't know what they shot and then perhaps edited and had in the first cut of the film, and then they decided to take it out for one reason or another. I don't know really what he did, because I just wasn't there.
Sorry, can you tell Luca if you have any chance that fans are dying for the 4 hour version movie? Please, thank you.
Right.
I think the fans are dying for any extra footage from this film. There's a question in the back row there.
Just to build on that question, I've heard that there may be a sequel. Have you heard anything about that? If you'll be working on it?
I don't think I'd be working on it, and I don't think, from my point of view, it's not a very good idea. If it means making Timmy and Armie Hammer look 40 and 45 or something, and making them up and all that sort of thing, or does it mean getting other actors? I don't know. I mean, it doesn't sound to me like a good idea, and I haven't heard what Andre Asserman has to say about it. I think he would have a lot to. I mean, maybe he likes that idea. I don't know, but I'm certainly not involved in it.
The next project you are working on is directing Richard II
Right.
in 3D.
Yeah.
And Chris Terrio is
Chris Terrio wrote the screenplay,
Yeah.
exactly.
And can you tell us a little bit about your?
Well,
why
it's been a project that I've been involved with for about 4 or 5 years, and it's a play that I've loved all my life, and at a certain point, I decided I wanted to try to make it into a film, and we actually, when at a point when we really could have made anything we wanted, it was right either just before or just after Remains of the Day, and I wanted to have Daniel Day-Lewis play Richard, and I wanted to have Kenneth Branagh play Bolingbroke, and I wanted Emma to be the queen, and of course Emma was married to Kenneth Branagh then, and I said to Emma one day, do you think Ken would be interested in playing Bolingbroke? And so she went to ask him, and he said, no, I want to play Richard. So that was the end of that that particular phase of that film, and then we made a whole group of other films along the way, and we didn't think about Richard anymore, and not very much, and then we came back to it. And the first really concrete thing that I did was I got Chris Terrio to write the screenplay, and which is what we've been showing to. And now we have a new Richard and a new Bolingbroke. The new Richard is Tom Hiddleston, and the new Bolingbroke is Damian Lewis. So let's hope that it all comes about.
I think there's 500 people here who would get in line to see that. We have time for 2 more questions, so there's one here.
First of all, thank you so much for making this film. It's certainly the most beautiful film I've ever seen, and I know it's something that I'll always come back to. I wanted to ask you, towards the end of the film, when Elio's having a conversation with his father, and his father says, I never had what you had, something always stood in the way. That kind of surprised me because I thought him and Anella certainly had a beautiful relationship, something I've never seen in my lifetime. And I know some people kind of viewed that as an admission that he too sort of had a desire for men, and I didn't see it that way at all. So I'm curious what you think he meant by that.
No, and I mean, I think he meant when he was very young that he had very close friendships with 1 or 2 male friends, and possibly one of those friends was interested in him and perhaps wanted to sleep with him or something, and then he didn't do it and didn't have the curiosity which is required in such a situation, and but I never felt that there was a hidden side to what the professor was saying, that there was a part of his life that something he had not lived a life that he really wanted to live, and that I never felt that that's what that meant.
Thank you so much.
Last question there. I think someone with a microphone here. There we are.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, there was a character named Vimini in the novel, the little girl with leukemia that I thought was really, really important to the story. It really balanced out Elio and Oliver's characters, and I was just wondering, was it your decision to remove Vimini, and why?
It was my decision. I felt that you can only have so many minor characters in a film, and the stories do shed them right and left when you do an adaptation, and that's what happened to her. And I felt it wasn't really something that I could develop in an interesting way, or that we had time to develop it or develop her. So I didn't have her.
For those of us who have watched your films and related to your characters, it's so very special to have you here to revisit both Morris and Call Me By Your Name together. I think I speak for a lot of us when I say that these films have been helpful for us, all of us, to understand ourselves, our love, and our place in the world. So for that, we thank you.
Thank you.